Do you really think people this fun, young, and free would have it in them to commit war crimes?
Waifu, get in, loser. We're going to capture some Muhammads. Dude, so much of it is just like unrestricted Islamophobia too, because it's so normalized. You could just like get away with it all the time, just actively dehumanizing the enemy. It's really fucked up. All right, let's watch how Israel uses sex to sell Zionism from Uncivilized.
Has used sex to sell Zionism, to convince people that Israel is a hot fantasy being realized by hot people, not a racist settler colony built on the killing, displacement, and erasure of the indigenous Palestinians. This is intentional, and there are 3 reasons why. They involve Israel's invention in the past, cover-up in the present, and survival for the future. And this all started when Zionists first started plotting for the creation of a Jewish homeland in the late 1800s. For centuries in Europe, stereotypes of Jews were that they were weak, pale, and frail. And the Zionist movement came to see it this way too, widely criticizing the weak, old Jew. In 1898, at the Second Zionist Congress in Switzerland, the co-founder of the Congress, Max Nordau, called for a new Judaism, a muscular Judaism, and invented the idea of the new Jew. This Jew would be rugged, muscular, strong, and tanned, and would have the mental and physical strength to realize the goals of Zionism and colonize Palestine. They called themselves Sabra, the prickly pear fruit in Hebrew, to represent what they saw this new Jew to be.
See, if we had watched this, we would have known what Sabra actually means, because I didn't know until I didn't know that there was a definition of Sabra beyond the fucking dog shit hummus until the Sabra Hummus Gate, the peak of anti-Semitism that has occurred in the world, really. The worst incident of anti-Semitism that anyone has ever seen, that landed, 5 people in Twitch prison for 30 fucking days. Oh my God.
And prickly on the outside, but tender-hearted and sensitive on the inside. And, of course, native to the land. Of course, the sabr, as it's called in Arabic, is a fruit indigenous to Palestine, appropriated for the Zionist fantasy of indigeneity. But anyway.
The men who came out to found this colony had never handled a plow, but they were possessed by 3 ideals: land, liberty, and labor.
It is these new Jews that created the Zionist militias that planned and orchestrated the Nakba, the mass-scale killing and displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, ending with the creation of Israel. And those same militias would become the Israeli army, the violent occupying force overseeing the colonization of Palestine today. And it's through this army that the visual of the new Jew lives on. But then with time, this visual became the only visual of Israel. This was a problem. In the early 2000s, surveys in the US were showing that Israel had a big PR problem with men aged 18 to 35 who just saw Israel as a conflict zone and weren't interested. So another rebrand was due, and the solution this time was bikinis. In 2007, the Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Tourism arranged for a photo spread in Maxim magazine, one of the most popular men's lifestyle magazines at the time. The brains behind this initiative at the Israeli consulate in New York said the models were, quote, a Trojan horse to present Israel as a modern country with nice beaches and pretty women. This video is from the official Israel in New York YouTube channel.
So you should come to Israel. We have a beautiful country, great food, great culture. Come to Israel. Beautiful girls as well. See you at the party.
This strategy, also called bikini diplomacy, has been seen all over since, with Israel constantly selling the image of a liberal, free country where it's always summer, where the days are full of beaches, bikinis, and chiseled bodies, and the nights are spent in an incredible nightlife scene open to anyone and everyone. In the face of this fantasy, Palestinians come off like a backwards, pesky nuisance trying to disrupt this liberal orgy utopia, not like colonized people looking for freedom and dignity. But that was in a time before social media, where only the powerful had access to a platform. Times have changed, and so the sexy offensive has had to adapt. All over TikTok and Instagram, you can find videos of Israeli soldiers posting thirst traps or dancing videos. Some of them act independently, while others are part of a concerted effort putting attractive women in the occupation forces in the public eye. Like the women at Alpha Gun Angels, a gun modeling and social media marketing agency who sell being a colonial foot soldier as a sexy lifestyle.
But listen, I've been in the army, I'm Israeli, I'm tough.
Thirst traps aren't only reserved for women, but for weapons as well. And beyond selling sex, they're selling colonial occupation as fun, relatable, and empowering. They love gay pride content, girl boss content, and jumping on TikTok trends. Of course, the great irony is that none of these liberal values are extended to Palestinians. They live under occupation, regardless of what they identify as. In that, colonialism does not discriminate. When the Palestinian reality started reaching people around the world, the strategy had to change. Whereas the goal before might have been to rebrand and repackage Israel, the goal now is to distract and whitewash. So bikinis were traded in for military uniforms. Fine, military occupation is a part of the reality, but it's not what you think. It's empowering and fun and sexy. Do you really think people this fun, young, and free would have it in them to commit war crimes?
Waifu, get in, loser. We're going to capture some Muhammads. Dude, so much of it is just like unrestricted Islamophobia too, because it's so normalized. You could just like get away with it all the time, just actively dehumanizing the enemy. It's really fucked up. What? Logs, please, sir. Really important, please. Read, could you have Eli Valley on? His book, Diaspora, a boy delves into the white, constructed sexual and masculine created Israeli identity, which is all about this. His talk was amazing on it. I could, yeah. Eli Valley is the GOAT. A big fan of his for quite some time. Incredible cartoonist. Yeah.
Perception of Israel is essential to its survival. But so is something else. That there are enough settlers there to keep up the colonizing. That brings us to the final reason Israel uses sex to sell Zionism. So Jewish Zionists have more kids with other Jewish Zionists. Have you ever heard of birthright? It's an all-expenses-paid trip to Israel that young Jews across the world are eligible for.
Doesn't seem like an Israel-only thing, though you see that everywhere, especially now in Europe. Oh, absolutely. No, this is directly a consequence of 9/11. Like, this is post 9/11 shit. Like, Orientalization obviously has always played a major role. Orientalism has played a major role in Israeli culture. Certainly, right? In dehumanizing Arabs, like they've been doing this for 76 years. At this point, it's like, you know, you can't keep up. You can't keep up a apartheid regime without actively dehumanizing the other. Having said that, however, the onslaught of Islamophobic, anti-Arab Orientalization, the Orientalist propaganda paired up with a healthy dose of Western chauvinism that was the underpinning of the global war on terror, that justified the global war on terror, that faucet opened up post 9/11 for the rest of the world, I mean. And I think that plays a pretty good, like a pretty important role in a lot of the defense of Israel, that oftentimes is not even a defense of Israel's actions at all, but instead is directly offense against those who have been branded as enemies of Israel, right? And you see it. I mean, you see it in this community quite frequently. This is something that I have to deal with on a regular basis. The idea that, like, we have already created the terrorism designation, and that carries a lot of weight with it, and it's actively, it's actively deployed in a way to undermine the positions of people who are offering any sort of context or nuance. Where did this guy come from? What did he say? What if I have Islamophobia? You're giving no reasons to why, e.g. an atheist shouldn't be afraid of Sharia and Salafist jihadis. I'm a Western civilian. I'm Islamophobic. I don't know why you say this is some problem. We don't have to ban this guy immediately. Okay. As far as like the underlying Islamophobia that you have, just so you understand, you are basically saying, like, okay, I'm a Western man living in the United States of America. Like, yeah, I'm afraid of black people. Like, what of it? It's the same exact principle. It's just bigotry of a different sort. The fundamentals there, however, is choosing not to understand this massive population of people and the diversity of opinion within this massive population of people and monolithizing them, while in the process of identifying silly things that you misunderstand, like Sharia, right? And also then pointing to Salafist jihadists. Like, what percentage of Muslims are Salafist jihadists? It is equivalent to assuming every single Christian is a Westboro Baptist Church member, okay? Every single Christian globally is a Westboro Baptist Church member who is actively also engaged in racialized hate crimes, right? You're pointing to a tiny, 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 minuscule percentage, okay? 98% of Muslims are great, but what about the radicals? Islam I don't like, especially not the Salafi jihadists. Groups like Hezbollah are radical. You're grouping people like Hezbollah with Salafi jihadists, which is hilarious because this is what I mean all the time when I say like reactionary thinking is illogical and Islamophobia of this sort is unironically causing you to misunderstand the situation. Hezbollah is an enemy of Salafist jihadists, like a very active enemy of Salafist jihadists. Now, you might consider them to be fundamentalist as well, even though they are Shia, which is a totally different sect. And in their day-to-day practical application and their associations or like the actions they take, you know, they are diametrically at odds with Salafist jihadists. Salafist jihadists, on the other hand, for the most part, are also fundamentalists of the Sunni variety that are directly backed by the American State Department. Like in order to have this conversation, I have to describe to you all of these different concepts that you have fundamentally misunderstood, and then have you be charitable every step of the way so that you can actively relearn what the correct definitions of these things are. Like, Sharia is an application of religious doctrine, okay, for any number of different laws. For the most part, it was heavily localized, okay? Most Muslim countries do not engage in Sharia law, and Sharia law is not what you understand it as, for the record, okay? But there is not like a real application. Sharia in its actual application comes from centralization that occurred after Western colonialism in a lot of these areas that were Muslim in general. And as far as Muslim Brotherhood and Salafist jihadists are both radical and both want to enforce Sharia over everyone, I think this has no bearing on the overwhelming majority of Muslims that are living their day-to-day experiences, their day-to-day lives, as much as the direct undermining of the entirety of the Muslim world, with some exceptions, by Western imperialism. If you're constantly at threat of destabilization, or if your government that doesn't really capture your interests whatsoever has been completely captured by the American State Department, for example, if you're just a client state that is kept incredibly poor, not allowed to develop, and the people's wishes are not necessarily, the people's demands and wishes are never represented in those governments, but those governments never go away because they get American military contracts and American weapons, and they can violently squash any sort of dissent. You will never be able to arrive at civil liberties and a civil rights movement in any of these countries, despite the fact that there are very real interests in the same exact ways that we had in the United States of America in fixing and modernizing a lot of these societies. Having said that, Islamophobia also dictates the false notion that like every single one of these Muslim majority countries are the exact same. But we are under control over the CIA. People's demands and wishes aren't represented. We still have a sort of colonialist government. Wait, what? I think it's also additionally ironic to have this conversation when we are watching Christian theocracy overtake the United States of America by a guy who's not really religious at all, but is utilizing that as a weapon and has done it now successfully twice, okay? Like, you have Christian nationalism as a nascent movement. At a time when religiosity has gone down in the United States of America, Christian nationalism is thriving at the tippy top of American society. And you're literally watching material conditions get undermined in a meaningful way in the United States of America, which is the wealthiest nation on earth. Even a place like this, that has solid infrastructure and has been the dominant force, the global hegemonic superpower for the past century at this point almost. And even here, you watch people's living conditions worsen and Christian nationalism grow in a openly fascist way, but you cannot comprehend how that could manifest in countries that have been bombed into oblivion. That's it. The question I have for many liberal, progressive-minded people in this chat is, do you agree with Donald Trump? Do you agree with the way that Donald Trump is redirecting society? Or do you understand how maybe even your immediate relatives have felt have fallen captive to the alluring nature of American fascism and Christian nationalism? Maybe some of them are voting for Donald Trump because they don't believe that he is actually he is going to implement Christian Sharia. Maybe some of them are voting for that exact same reason. But ultimately, it's not your wishes being represented by the government, right? If you can understand this in the United States of America, you should be able to understand this in all of these other nations that are being also, on top of everything else, destroyed deliberately, actively, through direct boots on the ground military warfare. That's my point. Treat everybody like normal human beings. If you don't have the capacity to understand where people are coming from, try to draw parallels within your own experience. This is at the heart of my commentary. That's it. And I think when you understand that, you recognize that it's not about Islam at all. It's not about Islam whatsoever. All religion is subject to interpretation. Religion is just a galvanizing principle. It can be used for good. It can be used for bad. Okay? These countries do not become fundamentalist because of Islam. They become fundamentalist because they are led by fundamentalist forces, sometimes directly propped up by the United States of America with foreign intervention, or as a direct consequence of being the only game in town that will actively fight against foreign invaders, like in the case in Iran, and foreign interference in the case of Iran. That's it. And unfortunately, it's a never-ending cycle of violence that we recreate, basically, and then we look at the results of said violence, and then we turn around and say they're barbaric. We have to keep doing this to them. We have to keep doing this violence to them. But ultimately, it's illogical. So if you care about critical thinking, if you care about being logical, okay, you have to try and understand how people get to the points that they're in and whether or not people are actually fond of these groups, ultimately. There is a reason that I talk about Ansar Allah in Yemen quite a bit. The Ansar Allah movement, once again, backed by Iran to a certain degree, is a minority leadership, okay? And the other factions inside of Yemen directly engaged in war in Yemen that caused endless famine and has been considered a genocide by international organizations, international human rights organizations, right? Saudi Arabia and the UAE had their own individual forces they were backing, they were arming, and that they were funding and also offering logistical support to. America was giving both Saudi Arabia and UAE the support necessary so that they could support the Yemeni population and the militia movements there. But what caused Ansar Allah to become the official government of Yemen? What caused the uprisings basically to end and everyone to put down their weapons and stop fighting with one another and engage in I guess some semblance of unity? It was the Ansar Allah government's actions against the state of Israel after Israel declared genocide on Gaza. Okay? Aren't you doing a whataboutism though? Can't we just agree that any theocracy is silly and often leads to a subjugation and persecution of types of people? No, I'm not doing a whataboutism. It's not whataboutism when I'm directly explaining the historical context in which how people arrive at a theocratic form of governance. What the fuck are you talking about? You just learned a word, okay, and you think you can apply it in this circumstance. I'm not doing whataboutism in this situation. I'm directly explaining to you the historical framework as to how countries become theocracies to begin with. Historical analysis, when directly talking about the countries, especially when we're talking about Islamophobia, is not whataboutism. It's just historical analysis. Yeah, my Iranian American wife was elected to the state house last cycle. Her centrist opponent says she may be beholden to the Ayatollah during their debate. Most of the audience didn't even notice or get that it was a ridiculous statement. Islamophobia is out of control, even in liberal circles. Yes. Does that make sense, chatter? I'll shut up for now, and I thank you, but I hope you understand. Many are afraid of religion and extremists within, especially Islam. I don't wish to be, but there's literally extremists who want to kill others. I understand. It's by and large to blame on Western influence. Also, the same could be applied to Christians. I also think Christian groups in Africa, some Christian groups in Africa are scary. Okay, brother, here's the difference. Here's the other side of this conversation that you also don't understand, but I think you're close to getting it, okay? We live in a Christian nation that is overwhelmingly dominated by white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. That is in our history, right? In the United States of America. When George W. Bush says, God told me to invade Afghanistan, or when the Republican Party is backed by a white evangelical Christian Protestant base of support that believes in the rapture and has a theological justification for its endless support for Israel, for example, we do not read that as like the entirety of the American Christian movement. We don't look at the war on terror as a global Christian jihad against Muslims, right? We don't see that as that because we live in it. So we have the capacity to understand that these are some people who believe this kind of insane shit, okay? And that most normal people don't agree with it, and that we don't really have a democratic voice in this process. But you never extend that level of charitability and analysis and nuance to the Muslim world. That's the point. That's it. Do you understand? True, I find that scary, but they don't target me. Yes, at least you're recognizing why you don't see it in the same way, though. That's it. And my goal here is to explain to people. My goal here is to explain to people that like people are just the same everywhere. Okay, they are. If they were brought into the same material circumstances, they would have very similar results. They would have very similar outcomes in general. But the notion that like extremist Muslims could target you and present a serious threat to you is also silly. Like a lot of people say this about Hamas, right? Hamas are religious fundamentalists. Like not every single person in Hamas is a religious fundamentalist. Many have been radicalized directly as a consequence of Israel killing their family members. Having said that, though, Hamas has never operated outside of the boundaries of Gaza because they can't leave Gaza with ease, okay? And they have a singular purpose, which is the end of the Israeli apartheid, the end of Israeli sovereignty over Palestinian lands, okay? Not only is this an emancipatory desire, it is a singular focus of all Palestinian resistance groups. And the hilarity over here, when you're living in the resurgence of the American Taliban, okay, when you're living in when you're staring directly at like the Christian fundamentalists dominating your lives in very meaningful fucking ways, you are taught to think that like Hamas presents a much greater danger to you. Okay, they're over there, motherfucker. It's the same with the Houthis. People talk about the Houthis being like this ever-present danger to the American suburbs almost. And it's like, it's laughable. And it's the same as the Taliban too. You got to worry about Al-Qaeda, not Al-Qaeda, okay? You got to worry about the American Taliban, not the fucking actual Taliban over in Afghanistan. You got to worry about the Jihad, not jihad. And yet, I think this hyper focus on Islam with a false understanding that like it's scary, okay? And that every single person in the Muslim world believes every single principle of ISIS, which does not represent Islam at all, and is more actively dismissed and fought against by the people there because they don't end up killing, that many Americans or even Israelis really. And the Israeli government has actively collaborated with, ISIS style Salafist movements in the region, specifically in Syria. Okay. They kill Muslims. They kill Yazidis. They kill other people in the region. They don't kill Westerners. Okay. That's the overwhelming majority of the victims of ISIS. And that's precisely the reason why many people despise them. Meanwhile, when you go to the Western world, most people that don't really pay attention to this stuff think every Muslim is like ISIS. You have to look at it in a rational manner and understand the real danger, right? Sharia law was not created after Western colonization. It was implemented based on Muhammad and the Quran by many scholars since the 7th century. I'm a Muslim, by the way, just looking for an insight. No, I said Sharia law and its understanding in the Western world is very different than its practical application in areas where it was heavily localized. Every fucking locality had very different opinions on what kind of laws that they might implement. Okay, Americans, when they think Sharia law, they think hands are getting chopped off if you steal anything. They think that like women are getting killed, they're getting stoned to death over and over and over again. And they're thinking beheadings. Okay, having said that, Sharia law, while I disagree because I am a secular person myself, I do on principle disagree with like a religious application of or any sort of laws applied because of an interpretation of religious dogma. I don't agree with that on principle. I disagree with it, obviously. But having said that, if you want to understand, historically speaking, this was never a real doctrine applied universally across the globe, and even past the point of local Sharia governance. Okay, like that was very different from region to region or even locality to locality. The centralization of Sharia as a religious code to be applied into any sort of like real governance came after the point of colonialism. The explanation you gave of Christian Sharia law and the Al-Qaeda was perfectly effective in getting my normie family members to chill about this shit. It does put things into perspective. Yes. Aisha Esquire, thank you for the 5 get the subs. Aisha Esquire also says any ethno-state is bad and government will corrupt religion and vice versa a Muslim. Yes. The problem in these circumstances is that like when material conditions worsen, just like in the United States of America, the reactionary movements grow. Okay. And religious fundamentalists take advantage of that always. And that is historic. That is historically important. And that's precisely what happens everywhere. In America, it's Christians. You know, in the Muslim world, it's, of course, Muslim fundamentalists. Also, doesn't Sharia mean law? So Sharia law just means law? Yes. It's like saying chai tea. Chai is just tea. Or non-bread. Or I guess the English version of it is ATM machine. If only people understood they shouldn't conflate Islam with conservatism. Exactly. My anger and my frustration always has been with reactionary ideals, conservatism. And that is a universal principle that I apply. If you don't think that there are progressive people in these Muslim nations, if you don't think that there are gay people in these Muslim nations, trans people in these Muslim nations, feminists in these Muslim nations, you're wrong. Of course they exist. And there are massive numbers. It's just not broadly represented depending on which country you're talking about. I didn't even finish this how Israel uses sex to sell Zionism thing. I don't know how the fuck we got to Islamophobia because that one chatter chimed in and chirped. And I hope it was a somewhat productive session that caused people to develop a better understanding and appreciation of where I am coming from. But let's round this up real quick.
As long as they're between 18 and 26.
Thousands of Birthright Israel participants filling the C-show with endless smiles, scholars, accents, and 10 bodies.
I didn't really have a connection to the homeland, and I came here, and just everybody's so great, and I'm just like overcome with like connection.
It's like you're high on Zionism.
I am really high right now.
The trip is sold as a journey home for young Jews to connect with Israel on an emotional and adventurous 10-day itinerary where they're accompanied by Israeli soldiers. That's not a coincidence. In the early days of Birthright, the billionaire co-founder Charles Bronfman said, quote, he was bothered that the kids on those early trips weren't bonding with their Israeli peers. His answer was developing the mifgash, the encounter, between Jewish Israeli teens and their diaspora counterparts. These encounters move very fast to what we call hormonal mifgashim. Things happen.
Countless romances from the trips have blossomed into serious relationships and even marriages.
And it looks like these boys and girls like each other a lot. I mean, you might have a lot of Jewish babies coming out of this trip eventually, a lot of marriages, a lot of relationships. Is that part of it?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be eventually, it can be tonight.
It's not a coincidence that intimacy is a part of the trip. Participants spend the whole trip with Israeli soldiers intentionally chosen to be attractive. They're taken out for nights of drinking and dancing, and some even spend a night in a fake Bedouin tent, quote, where participants sleep crowded together, a setup conducive to first kisses.
I remember even on the trip that I attended, there were two Israeli soldiers who clearly were into each other. Like they very much had a vibe. And someone made a joke on the trip that you have to save yourselves for the Americans, basically clarifying that they were there to seduce us.
So why is coupling so encouraged on these?
This is, by the way, exactly what Israelism, the documentary, is about as well, and how birthright plays a formative role in basically creating this association with Israel amongst young American Jews, funded in large part by American Christians, but that's besides the point.
These trips. Well, the originator of the idea for birthright said one of his main goals was to, quote, create a situation whereby spouses are available, because at the time, intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews was at a high, which isn't great when you're trying to build an ethnocracy. To maintain a demographic majority.
Jewish Bag says, this is why I didn't go. I'm gay. Bro, I went on birthright. It's so funny watching it being broken down. Yeah. Bro, if you're... Dude, this is why I always say the greatest threat to Israel is not Iran, is not Hamas, is not Hezbollah, okay? It's Los Angeles. It is New York. It is Boca Raton. That's it. Like, why the fuck would you be like, yeah, I want to go and live in Israel if you're like, I love the situation in America, okay? It's great. I am an American. This is a question I present to some of my normie Jewish friends all the time, which is, you're American. The fuck are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? It's just like very hard to shake people off this notion, okay?
Over Palestinians, Israel needs Jews to make more Jews. So what better way to encourage reproduction and immigration than through a coming-of-age, euphoric, emotional, and adventurous trip? The reality of Israel's nation-building story is violence, displacement, dispossession, colonization, and...
When I first saw Midsommar, one of my buddies who was watching with me was like, holy shit, this is exactly like what happened on Birthright regarding the whole baby-making shit in Midsommar. Yeah.
Settlement. That's not a great brand. In order to get settlers invested in the vision and try to secure the future, sex is a great tool. Beauty and aesthetics and fun are great marketing tactics, and they have tangible outcomes, like more babies. More babies means more people to get conscripted to the occupation forces and maintain the oppressive military infrastructure necessary for Israel to exist. And what better way to convince people to at least look the other way, and at most participate, than by making it sexy?
That was... What was the... Wait, hold on.
For a long time...
Oh, that was Uncivilized, which has a bunch of banger videos, by the way. Including how Vietnam teaches Palestine to fight invaders. They have a bunch of really cool videos. But the video that we just watched is how Israel uses sex to sell Zionism.